The Inuits used to be called Eskimos by others, a name which came from a Native American word for raw meat eater. Now, the people in the Arctic are officially known as the Inuit, which means the people, or singularly, Inuk, which means the person in Inuktitut language. The natives prefer to be known as Inuit over Eskimos, where the Inuit are a group of indigenous people with similar culture and language inhabiting the Arctic regions of Canada and other Northwest territories such as Greenland and Denmark, Siberia and Russia, and Alaska and the United States. The current population of Inuit living in the Arctic region. They often hunt animals for sustenance due to harsh conditions that cannot sustain the practice of agriculture and the rearing of livestock. Even in the old Eskimo culture, though it was tight, there were usually enough game animals around to provide sufficient food and resources for everyone in the group, including the old. The Inuit, mainly in the northern Alaska, practice senicide, which is the abandonment to death, suicide, or killing of elderly by culture. The Inuit were highly dependent on their environment and thus often placed under the extreme stress of famine. Therefore, when old age strikes, instead of waiting around as they slowly waste away towards death while eating food their companions fight to catch, and clothing their companions struggle to construct, the elderly Inuit were taken to sea and set adrift. There are also occasions where the elderly would voluntarily kill themselves to cease being a burden to the family. One example would be an assisted suicide, where an elderly might ask a family member to kill them during difficult times, often by drowning them in open water. This is because death by unassisted suicide was believed to lead to a less pleasant. Apart from those mentioned, there were also times that the elderly were thrown into sea, buried alive, or starved to death. There were also other practices, like infanticide, the killing of infants, and invalidicide, the killing of the irrecoverably sick or disabled. Though it occurs, infanticide was rare as children were seen as a blessing to the Inuit. Unless times were tough, children would be provided with resources until they could support themselves. Thus, surplus of food and materials would be expended primarily on children instead of the elderly. Senicide was only practiced during harsher times such as famine, when resources were scarce. This is due to the community belief that the elderly and those deemed unproductive, such as the disabled and heavily ill, were useless to the community. Hence, they were seen as a burden, draining the community's resources. Additionally, senicide occurred as the elderly would only grow weaker and burden the community. To the Inuit, sending the elderly off is also seen as a blessing, a way to gracefully exit the world without becoming a burden and a point of resentment. In a way, this allowed the elderly to be preserved in the minds of the living in a more ideal state. The last known practice of Inuit senicide happened in 1939. After exploring more about the Inuits' culture, our group finds that certain aspects of their cultures are undesirable and unacceptable in the local context. However, we should view them with an objective and non-judgmental mindset, as different cultures have different beliefs and practices. Thus, it does not make them right or wrong when certain things are done differently. In our opinion, we feel that the killing of elderly for individual survival may seem as inhumane, but we believe that the Inuit did it out of desperation, as they were incapable of providing sufficient resources for the entire community. In the case of Singapore, much unlike the Inuit,
Created using Powtoon.